If you have any questions now regarding the process, you could raise your hand now. And Paul, you're going to introduce committee members.
Excellent. Thank you, Betty. As Betty pointed out, I'm Paul Devlin. I am the co-chair of Chelsea Land Use Committee. Marty? Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Martin DeCat. I'm a member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. Bert?
Hi all, I'm Bert Lazar, member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee. Glad to be here.
Twee?
Good evening. My name is Twee Pham, member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee.
Hector?
Evening, everybody. My name is Hector Vasquez.
Hector, we lost your mid-sentence there.
Hector Vasquez, a member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee. Welcome, everybody.
Carrie?
Hi, I'm Carrie Keenan, a member of Chelsea Land Use. Thanks, everybody, for spending a holiday evening with us.
Peggy?
Sorry. Hi, good evening, Peggy Coe.
Good evening. Viren?
Hi, I'm Viren Brambit, Chelsea Land Use Committee. Nice to meet you all.
Dave?
I'm Dave Holoka, a member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee.
Thank you. Tina?
Chelsea Land Use Committee, Tina DiFelice Antonio.
Nice accent there, Tina. Thanks for throwing that in. Mike?
Yeah.
Hi, Mike Noble, member of Land Use Committee.
Brad?
Good evening, Brad Pescarella, member of CB4 Land Use. Good evening.
And Pamela?
I am Pamela Wolf, member of the Chelsea Land Use Committee, public member of CB4. Good evening, everybody. I'd love to know where we all are geographically. Just
Manhattan.
curious.
Manhattan,
Yeah.
Chelsea.
Pam, I think you're the only one that is traveling out of state right now.
Field. I'm a field. Yes.
I'm in the UK, Pam.
Oh,
My goodness, Brad.
I haven't seen
Wow.
my mother-in-law in 3 years, so we're happy to be here.
How
that's
old
Just got out
is
of
she?
quarantine.
How old is she, Brad?
She's 80.
Jane and I will be in the UK visiting her mother, who is turning 100
Wow.
for New Year's.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
how long did Jeff be in quarantine, Brad?
Okay, you guys, we got to do our meeting.
4 days.
4 days, thank you.
This is nice.
I mean,
I'm sorry that we don't have our Christmas social so we can all gather and share stories.
Yeah.
But Brad, it's good to hear that you're there. So just an overview of today's meeting agenda. As Betty pointed out, we don't currently have any items to vote on, and we don't have any applicants coming forward. So Betty and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of think about this as a year in review and a year looking forward kind of meeting. So we have a bunch of updates on some of the major items that have happened in the past few months. And then for new business, I want to talk about maybe some future activities that we might want to engage in or not. It's an open discussion for people to have on the committee. So if that is acceptable to all for the agenda, what I'd like to do is just start with the update, and you can see on the agenda we have 4 items we want to talk about tonight. The first is the update on the Starrett-Lehigh Terminal Warehouse rezoning application. As many of you know, those 2 parcels were added to the Special West Chelsea District, creating a new sub area. There were many layers of issues with them, many conversations with them about a variety of different things. And we went back and forth with the development team on quite a number of issues. But then when it came time for the city council vote, there were still some outstanding issues that we wanted to make sure were resolved. So Betty and I attended the subcommittee hearing and the city council hearing and met with Corey Johnson's staff and land use council staff to make sure that we got some incorporation of some of our concerns. And I want to say that, it's not often that we sort of celebrate our successes as a committee, but on this particular one, I think we really did make a significant impact on how Starrett-Lehigh and Terminal Warehouse will be developed going forward, and how they'll be seen as sort of the bridge between the High Line and the Hudson River. And most notably, there was a lengthy conversation about the percentage of use group 10A, which is destination retail or big box retail. And many of you might recall that the applicant came in and asked for 15% of total floor area to be used for destination retail. We had argued that that number was too high, that we thought 440,000 square feet of big box retail would be too much for those two buildings. And we asked them to come back with various solutions as to what they would propose to bring that number down and make it realistic. We weren't trying to stop the project because we supported the rezoning. So when they didn't come back with anything, we said, all right, you want 15, we're gonna say 10. And we went back and forth on 10, and the city council ended up approving a 10% cap on destination retail, which cut about 140,000 square feet of retail, of big box retail, out of those two sites. So we feel like that was a step in the right direction. A couple of the other issues that came up through the legislative process is that once the development starts, we are going to require regular pedestrian counts on the north sidewalk of West 26th Street and look at those at regular intervals, maybe twice a year, and reporting to the council member's office to see where that stands. And then require that the developer work with DOT about pedestrian safety measures at specific thresholds as the pedestrian levels grow. For example, once it's increased by 25% from existing levels, we look at what steps need to be taken. In addition, they're going to be looking to explore a mid-block crossing as part of the FEIS transportation chapter issue. And we look for some language when the draft comes to us from the draft EIS with very specific language to accomplish those goals. So that is our accomplishment at Starrett-Lehigh. Anybody, did I see a hand go up with a question?
No, that was me clapping, Paul.
Oh, very good.
I have I don't know, a double reaction, but you said something about after pedestrian traffic increases by 25% on 26th Street. Am I repeating you correctly?
Yes.
They'll investigate it again. Why wait that long? That's a messed up block, no?
Well, the issue is that based on the current traffic counts and pedestrian flow projected, that did not merit immediate correction. But what we're saying is, we don't believe you, right? So we want you to continue to do surveys as the development progresses, and because right now, we don't know exactly what the mix of retail and office and medical and academic space will be in the building. And they use those different uses to drive the number of pedestrian count. And so if they have more academic and less retail, the pedestrian count will be lower. But if they have all retail, the pedestrian count will be higher. If they have food retail, they'll be higher, right? So depending on what mix they ultimately end up with in the building will have an impact on pedestrian count. And normally when these things are approved, there is no guarantee of future counts, right? Normally it's like, okay, here's the plan, here's the zoning, it's done, and that's the end of it. But what we've asked for is that they do regular counts. And if it does show increases beyond what is projected, then action will be taken at that point. And there'll be a review about what measures can be taken to mitigate the overflow of pedestrian counts. Does that make sense, Marty?
It absolutely makes sense, except, no, I don't want to say it with an except, because it makes sense all by itself, full stop. That's a good move and we need to keep checking it. The problem I'm having is that every time I drive that block, almost every time, it's actually gotten a little better, to be honest. Almost every time I drive that block, there's a big vehicle sticking out and pedestrian traffic has to walk around in funny ways. And when I'm driving that block to avoid that big truck that's sticking out, I'm virtually going on the sidewalk of the south side in order to get around. And so waiting doesn't seem to make sense to me, is what I'm saying.
And I would tend to agree with you, Marty, on that. Waiting doesn't make sense given personal sort of subjective experiences on site, but it was hard for us to get DOT to take action based on sort of the engineering counts, right? So us experiencing a truck blocking the path and us asking Starrett-Lehigh Management Company to put more controls in place to watch the flow, for us to ask Starrett-Lehigh to have internal management on how the trucks are parked and managed. All of those things have been put into place, yet DOT is still saying it doesn't cross the threshold of needing additional mitigation. So by asking them to continue to monitor that is something that we have not done in the past that will provide us that sort of future effort and method to seek mitigation in the future.
Good move on your part, messed up, seriously messed up on their part.
Yeah, listen, when we rewrite the handbook on the secret handbook on traffic counts and traffic mitigation issues, that might be a conversation for the later part of this meeting. Let's move over to Viren.
Wait a minute, I have a second thing that I just want to mention briefly. You and I had a conversation in which I congratulated you about getting it down from 15,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet, and that's
15% to 10%, not 15,000, not 10,000. It's a reduction from 440,000 square feet to 300,000 square feet.
Thank you. That's a great move. It's still too large.
Okay, Viren.
Thank you, and congrats, Paul. I think that number is some achievement. We would have liked to see even lower number than 10%, but we'll take 10% for now. One quick question. In terms of educational program, any commitment, any percentage that you can discuss? Nothing.
No, I think within the zoning they have, and I don't have that full application up in front of me with all the components, but there was a percentage of space. If we look in the draft EIS, which I don't have it open in front of me, but there is a forecasted amount of academic space and forecast amounts of medical space. It was part of the mix that they used to show what traffic would be generated and how the various intersections would be impacted and what mitigation would be necessary to fix those problems.
No, I get that. Sorry, I get that. But in terms of actual sort of commitment as to what programmatically, what those educational programs might be, there's nothing, right? There's no commitment. Okay, but would we have a chance to have that conversation with them at some point or no?
I'm going to say no to that, only because, you know, the rezoning is in place and it dictates how much square footage they can have. And then it becomes the private developer's determination as to what they do with their building.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
No. Pam?
So I was just curious, we were talking about the sort of traffic that traverses 26th Street to be measured and on a regular basis. Did you say like twice a year?
Yeah, and to be clear, it wasn't vehicular traffic, it was pedestrian traffic.
Pedestrian, I understand that.
Okay.
My
And
point
twice a year, yeah, we asked for
I
twice a year.
wasn't trying to ask a question. I was just trying to make the point that it is seasonal, that traffic, and it isn't going to Starrett-Lehigh necessarily or to the terminal warehouse. It's traffic going, foot traffic, pedestrian traffic going to Pier 66, which gets much heavier in the warmer months. So the timing of when those measurements are taken should be taken into consideration.
That's a great point, Pam, and I agree. And I think that as we move forward, when those time periods come for them to say, we want to do this pedestrian count now, we would say, well, let's wait till 4th of, if they say we want to do it in May, we say, let's wait till 4th of July weekend when the traffic's going to be the heaviest or something like that. Like, I think we may be able to, at that point, have some say, but they haven't set the dates specifically for us yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks. That's a good idea, though. Thanks for bringing that up. Brad?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the co-chair and the chair for dealing with the city council. Thank you, guys. Paul, what's happening on the top of the building with the screen? Is that come back around? I know we denied it. We said it was inappropriate, that they had room to move it down. Is that dead?
And David, you were at the LPC hearing on this. You might want to respond to that question. I think it was basically approved. So David, unmute Dave.
I'm sorry, which one are we talking about?
The generators on the top of the roof of Starrett-Lehigh?
Yeah, they were approved, unfortunately.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I seem to recall they were, and I knew you went to that hearing. Mike?
Yeah, in terms of timing that pedestrian count, a Fleet Week would be a good time to do it. Can we stack the deck?
I think what they do with traffic counts on any of those, they offset for extenuating circumstances. So I don't know that I would necessarily recommend Fleet Week. I think it's a fun idea because then the counts would be so high, it'd have to offer some mitigation. But
I love it though. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Great. All right. So again, everybody, Brad, thanks for thanking me and Betty, but everybody here really contributed a great amount. That rezoning was a long, lengthy process. There were many, many components. Many of the things that we as committee members put forward to the development team were in fact approved. So like by the development team, they incorporated our ideas into many of their formulas. The last remaining points were just the ones that they weren't 100% with us, and we had to just push a little bit extra hard to get those points. Jesse, what do you have to add?
I just wanted to acknowledge that what I would call the Euler process worked in this project, and that is that the community board sort of sets out a very clear blueprint, roadmap, whatever you want to call it. We worked with Gail's office, we worked with Corey's office, we worked with the land use, staff from city council, and that's how it's supposed to work. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And it was in my mind, in terms of a process and in terms of a end result, was exactly kind of what this whole process is supposed to be. So
yeah, we'll have to remember that for the next Euler item.
Yeah, the next one that doesn't go quite as well. Speaking of items that didn't go quite as well, let's move to agenda item number 2.
But Paul, could we just say, is there anyone from the public who wants to ask a question about this? Is anyone here from the public?
Yeah, there are 7 people from the public here. If anybody wants to raise their hand, we can move you over. I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Okay, so let's move on.
So we'll move on. So again, item number 2 on the agenda is not one of our, it's let's say a more challenging issue than we've had with the others. So at the Gansevoort market, we fought very hard trying to get a stop work order in place once we found out that the soft demolition was causing the buildings to fail. LPC went to DOB. DOB issued a public safety concern and said that the facades had to be fully dismantled and rebuilt. Not the direction we wanted to go. Certainly an experience that we've seen in the past where people set, I said in one of the meetings, why did it come as a surprise to anybody that when you started working on a building built in the 1840s that it would start to fall down unless you stabilized it? Like, this just seems silly to me. And we tried to get a stop work order, but we were unsuccessful in that endeavor. But certainly our position on that issue has been made very, very clear. We were very successful at getting meetings with LPC and DOB. So they really did hear our concerns. They didn't necessarily act on our concerns, but they heard them. And one of the things that we are getting on a regular basis, which I still want to fine tune and get a little more detail, is that we do get 2-week look ahead schedules on the project. So we'll get a better sense about what's coming up on the site so that we can continue to monitor it and continue to hopefully see the outcome be more of what we thought was going to happen on the site based on the application and our decision on that site. So that's an ongoing struggle. We know we're going to have more to do with that in 2022, but that's where it stands now. The stop work order did not come through, and they have continued moving forward with the project. So that's all I have to really say on that one. Dave, Pam.
Yeah, I would just like to.
This is shocking that Dave and Pam want to talk on this one.
We we were granted a meeting with DOB and LPC at Department of Buildings offices. And it was, I have to say, it was very.
David, can I interrupt for 1 second? When you say we, just be clear, it's Safe Chelsea, not the community board.
Right. And Betty did attend. Pamela was there. All of the elected officials were there. Andrew Berman, the head of Village Preservation, was there. The head of Historic Districts Council was there. Significantly, the Landmarks chair, Sarah Carroll, was not there. Landmarks executive director, Lisa Kersavage, was not there. Only John Weiss, Landmarks deputy counsel, was in the meeting. And it was very much a top-down meeting. Timothy Lynch, who is the chief engineer for enforcement at DOB, did most of the talking, and he simply rattled off all of the reasons why he felt the buildings needed to come down. When I asked about alternatives like stitching the delaminating brick withes together, or pinning the facade to the sidewalls, or what other options had been entertained and why they had been dismissed, we got no answer at all. And in fact, when I asked about pinning the facades back to the sidewalls, Tim Lynch said, I didn't think it was an option. And that's all we got from him. And given the people in the room, I thought that that was a very dismissive and even arrogant answer. He could at least have explained why he didn't think it was an option. Another thing that I would point out, I repeatedly asked John Weiss if LPC had sought any kind of outside expertise, any kind of opinion as to whether the buildings needed to come down. I know that they did. And John Weiss admitted that to me in a phone conversation the day before the meeting. And yet when I asked him 3 or 4 times about it during the meeting, he waffled. And all he could say is, well, we spoke with the developer's engineer, or we spoke with LPC's engineer. And at one point, Melanie LaRocca, the DOB commissioner, jumped in as I was asking him as if to spare him. It's clear to me that LPC wasn't willing to go to the meeting. There wasn't going to be a give and take meeting. Obviously, they're not going to argue with DOB in front of the public. They're both mayoral agencies. I think a decision had been made, but I kind of get the impression that LPC didn't agree. And if they hired an outside engineer to give an opinion, that's a publicly funded peer review that they're not being forthcoming about. So it was not a satisfactory meeting. I felt badly for all the elected officials and their staff who were wasting their time there. And, you know, even if there wasn't something unseemly about the way this happened or the reasons the decisions were made, what are people left to think? And they didn't give any explanations that might reassure us or help the public trust in Department of Buildings. So I'll let Pamela speak.
All right, Pamela?
Well, everything David said, okay. It was embarrassing and stomach churning, I have to say, and that's not the first time. It seems to me that if anything positive comes out of this, it might be coming out of this community board, and it might be an effort to require builders who come like Tavros to do this kind of terrible destruction to buildings with leaving just the facades, that they be required to reinforce those facades before they touch anything inside the buildings. I mean, this is such a no-brainer. Everybody knew basically that this was bound to happen. Even if those facades were perfectly solid, which they look to be, and perfectly plumb, which they certainly look to be, we're told now in a letter from Tavros's engineer, I guess, I don't know who that letter, where it originated, stating that the walls were bulging and leaning and this and that. Well, you know, come on, please, they were not. It was pretty obvious. Do we think that there's something that we could do going forward?
Pam, that is exactly what the last item on the agenda of tonight's meeting is.
Oh, I'm so glad. So I have to stick around to the very end.
You do. You have to ride it out with the rest of us.
Okay, so basically, oh, did I lose his?
No, you're
did
there.
Something, I'm there. I did something. Anyway, never mind.
You're still here.
I'm
All right,
so glad
so-
to be. I'm glad I'm still there because if I get lost, I don't know how to find my way back. Okay.
Follow the turkeys. Follow the turkeys.
So I think,
right,
you
so-
know, other than expressing my deep disgust at this whole business, I think I've said enough.
Thank you. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to speak on this specific issue? I see Andrew Berman's hand has gone up. Another shocking surprise. Andrew Berman wants to talk about this park. Jesse, can you move Andrew over for us, please? Andrew, if you could introduce yourself and turn your camera on so we could see you, that'd be great help. You should be ready to be unmuted now. There you go. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to speak. You know, I want to just basically sort of second.
Andrew, I'm sorry, would you just introduce yourself to the rest of the public? Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, Andrew Berman from Village Preservation. I just want to second what Pam and David said, but also just kind of specifically, you know, we really went into this trying to get answers on a couple of particular areas. One is, why were these fatal flaws in the building, if they existed, not detected or determined earlier in the process when they were going through the review process for their application to the Landmarks Preservation Commission? Why were alternatives to the partial demolition of the facade not considered or implemented? And was this really about the imminent danger to the building, or was it about the incompatibility of the work that was being done and that was being pursued with the ultimate goal of changing and altering the buildings, as opposed to it being incompatible with finding a way to just keep the building standing? We did not get answers on any of those, which made me more convinced than ever that the answers were the ones that we feared they were, which was that they didn't do proper oversight in the beginning. There were alternatives that could have been considered but weren't, and that this really was about the fact that they wanted to allow the developer to move ahead with their plans rather than the primary responsibility, which was to make sure that these landmarks were not destroyed. So it was deeply disappointing, and you know, it took weeks to get this meeting, by the way, and they really had to be forced to do it. So, you know, they went into this kicking and screaming and really didn't move, change, or offer any new information as compared to what had been shared previously. So I would just say it was quite disappointing.
Thank you, Andrew. Carrie?
Just a quick clarification. When you say they, do you mean Landmarks? Do you mean DOB? Do you mean both?
Well, I mean, it's disappointing from both, but DOB was very much leading the meeting. You know, as some others have said, I suspect that LPC would have preferred a different outcome here. I actually, to be perfectly honest, suspect that LPC reached out to us for exactly that reason, because they wanted us to make a stink that they couldn't. That's just a suspicion. I don't know it.
Let's not presuppose what anybody's behavior was, and let's look at just what actually happened. And as Pamela raised, you know, later in this meeting, maybe we have an opportunity to try to address some of these concerns in a programmatic way rather than passionate way, but a programmatic way. So, Mike.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that Pam and David put in their letter that stuck with me was the fact.
And again, Mike, let's echo that was the Chelsea letter.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Which is brilliant letter, by the way, brilliant letter, scholarly letter, and we know who wrote it, right, Pam? So anyway, right. One of the things in it was the fact that once the developer saw that there was now this nice, easy path to the new building in the back, right? What incentive would you now want to obstruct your easy path, right? So,
well, again, Mike, let's be careful though about the distinction.
I know. I'm
what the community board
accusing
position has been versus the Safe Chelsea position. We as Chelsea Land Use had take a different position than Safe Chelsea. And the supposition that they did this intentionally to give clearance to the backyard is not something that we know to be true. So let's be very cautious about the language we're using at this Chelsea land use
Right.
meeting.
No, I'm saying that that might not have been the original intent, but once it became apparent that it was convenient, yeah, it disincentivizes any interest you have in obstructing the path again. That's all I'm saying. All right.
Okay. Dave, you're going to have final say on this, then we're going to move on.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify a few things, the facades are gone. They've been taken down. We also don't have any indication that the developer damaged the facades. The whole case that's being made is that what was uncovered when they took the plaster off the inside phases of the walls was that the damage was uncovered. And I have foiled Landmarks and DOB for their correspondence, for any reports that may have been made to them. And, if LPC actually advised against what DOB ordered, hopefully we'll find out. And, it's too late to save the buildings, but I think that DOB should think twice about ever ordering something like this again. And if foiling makes them more sensitive about it, so much the better.
All right, thank you so much. So let's move on. We've opened up to public already, so we're going to move on to the next agenda item. I'm just going to rescan the attendees crowd to make sure. Okay, and we're now going to move on to better news that Betty gets to talk about.
Yeah, little different topic. So as you will recall, we wrote a letter about 128 West 17th Street, the former colored school number 4. And just to refresh your memory, the board recommended that this be a landmarked site, that it was the last remaining former colored school in Manhattan. One was designated for a landmark in Brooklyn, so there's some precedent against this, for this. And it was a cultural hub in that time, and African-American families gathered there during the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. And it's now owned by the city of New York, and it's currently vacant. So we wrote a letter advocating for this site to be landmarked. And then November 29th, we got a letter, I think it's in the Dropbox, from Landmarks that says that the chair referred it to our letter and our ask to the research department of LPC, and the research department director wrote back to us and said we have added it to our files as we study this building. We appreciate the information you provided about the school's history and your analysis of the benefits of designation. So I don't know whether that means it's deep down in a file cabinet or at the top. I'm sure there's many other buildings ahead of it, but I don't know whether or not there's something more that perhaps Chelsea organizations might push LPC. We've done, I think, our best description of the site and the reasons why it should be landmarked. So I see that Eric Washington is in our midst.
Betty, let's let the
committee members speak, but I just wanted to acknowledge that he's there. And committee members, would you like to say anything?
I see Bert's hand came up.
Bert, where are you? There you are.
I'm here. I had the same reaction as you did, Betty. Where in the files, top of the files, bottom of the files. I'm not as familiar with LPC as other people, but I find this rather disappointing that they didn't seem to express any enthusiasm that I had, and I think many other committee members had when Mr. Washington presented to us, when Eric Washington presented the proposal to us. And again, I'm not familiar with LPC. I would defer to Pam, to David, is there any way, and I don't know how to phrase this, to facilitate that process of research?
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm at too. Can we nudge it in any way?
Yeah. Are there, well, more than just can we, are people aware of actual ways to nudge?
What did you say? The actual
Are
what?
people are aware of actual ways to nudge it. In other words, call this one, speak to that one, have these 12 people knock on their door.
Oh, further outreach into the community? Is that what you mean?
Whatever it is, to make them move.
Okay.
Make sure
Okay.
it's not on the bottom of the file, but on the top.
Yeah.
I
I hear you.
Priority for us.
Yeah. Okay. Who is next? Hand up. Did you see?
Viren?
Viren?
Hi, Barry. Thanks for the update. I mean, this is basically a canned letter, right? I mean, it's just like a receipt, acknowledge that we have received your letter. It doesn't tell you anything beyond that. It's obviously they're not going to take a position on it yet. Basically, they're referring it to next year, next administration, whatever have you. But I think one thing we could probably do, and I'm sort of, this could be a committee discussion, as Paul put it, towards the end of this meeting, is to probably in Jan, we can write another letter and this time make even a more forceful sort of argument, so to speak. And because they're the kind of, remember that map that I sort of had discussed with you, that there is a kind of number of different locations in our district, and then we can make an argument and make a case for why this actually becomes more important in the sort of larger context of things. So
Mike, I'm sorry, Ryan, was that it? Mike, is your hand still up from the last one, or did you have something to add on this one? Mike Noble?
Yeah, sorry, my mistake. Sorry.
Okay,
sorry.
all right. Pam?
I can speak here for Save Chelsea to say that there is indeed a letter forthcoming on this subject from our group. So there will be, that's one other way to be supportive of Eric's endeavor.
That's good news, Pam. Thank you. I'm glad that that's happening. Is that going to be soon, your letter?
Yes.
As soon as you get it. No, and I think that to sort
Do
of
you want
answer,
to be copied?
to answer that question that others raised is that when we met with Eric and the first proposal came in, we were really sort of almost one of the first steps in getting LPC to rise this up, and getting the recommendation to Eric, and he'll speak to this, I'm sure, was to get other organizations to speak out. So it wasn't just coming from us, but it was coming from the community. And as Bert points out, it was more of a letter of recognition that they received our letter without any sort of direction about what they were doing with the material. And maybe Eric has heard different and can add to that. So Dave, your hand came up, and then let's go to Eric.
Yeah, I agree with Viren's suggestion of a follow-up letter, maybe once the new administration is in, or whether maybe once we have a sense of whether Sarah Carroll is going to stay chair, or maybe wait for the next new chair. But I think this next letter should have more of a tone of, what in the world are you waiting for? I mean, this building clearly rises to the level of something that should be landmarked, and landmarks often uses the dodge that the building is too altered from its original condition. This one is almost intact. The only element that's not still there is the original wooden cornice, which couldn't be expected to survive. And, is Landmark's equity framework just talk? This should be such a slam dunk and such an easy decision. I think we need to emphasize that and stay on them about it.
Okay, right. I mean, we did put those points in the letter, but we can try to beef it up more.
Let's see if the applicant has any updates for us. And see, Eric, let's hear from Eric.
Paul, can I just add one more quick thing to what David just said? I think in this case, we're not talking about sort of landmark designation due to architectural significance, but the sort of historical significance of this place. So that should be sort of emphasized. So it's not about how much has been altered, but it's why it is important for it to be landmarked based on history of the place.
Yeah, I to be honest, I tried to throw in as many reasons why this should be landmarked in this letter, the cultural reasons and so on. So anyway, so I guess that's committee members have said.
Yeah, let's hear from the applicant himself. He's here.
Eric?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi everyone. Yes, so I received a similar response from Landmarks, which kind of echoed the same tone that I got 3 years ago when I originally submitted the RFE. Since CB4's letter, including CB4's letter, I have about half a dozen other letters that have gone out, one from Village Preservation. I think you also received a letter in response from Landmarks, which has the same tone, which is kind of vague, but it acknowledges having gotten a letter. And the Manhattan Borough historian has written, and he received a response from them, which surprised him because he says nobody ever gets back to him that quickly. And they wrote back to him like within the same day. The African American Redress Network, which deals with nationally with reparations issues, wrote a letter. And the Victorian Society of America also submitted a letter on Tom Monkey's studio. So I think all of those, and there are more forthcoming as from Save Chelsea, those letters will serve to give some sort of nudge because they're coming from different directions and not necessarily from the usual suspects in preservation. And I just was drafting letters to Eric Adams and some other politicos who I have addressed before and I haven't heard back from, but I'll swing back to them. I think that January 1st, when the new administration starts officially, is the time to send it. I was about to send them today, and then I thought, no, nobody's responding to anything the next 2 weeks. So I'll do that, and I think that may have some impact. The other thing I'm trying to do, though, in this time, until Landmarks says something definite, is to plunge back into the history. So this gives me an opportunity to do that. So I've got even more reasons for them to consider this a justifiable place to be landmarked, that are rooted in the building's history and its event history, its connection to the draft riots, and several other issues, several other items that should be of interest to them if we can kind of pin them down and get an audience with them directly.
Right.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad that you're doing that. If you find more information and when you're digging deeper about the history and linking it to the history, do share that with us, if there's anything
Happy to.
that we haven't gotten already, and keep in touch with us because that would be great. And these new organizations that you just listed, maybe you'll, if we don't have those letters already, maybe you can send them to Jesse.
I have PDFs of all of the letters, so I can share those with you as well.
Yeah, because that'll help too if we write a new letter in the next year and all the organizations that are pressing for this. So it's a good advance.
Thanks, Eric. I think Andrew Berman's hand went up for this conversation too. Andrew, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, although it's mostly been covered, but I just did also want to say, as Eric mentioned, that we did send a letter in support and got a similar response, which based on my experience doesn't really tell you all that much. It's certainly not a no, which is good. It's definitely not a yes. It obviously requires a lot more work. And we did have a bit of sort of research and historical context that we were able to offer, because there was a colored school in Greenwich Village, which we've done some research on. And so we provided a little more context. I'm sure there's more, and I'm sure it would be incredibly helpful if the local council member, borough president, other elected officials would offer their support for this as well.
Thank you, Andrew. That's good. So we'll proceed in the next year, and you know, if you find out more information, just like Eric, feed it to us. So then we'll be able to utilize it. I think, does anyone else have a comment about this? Or I think we've covered it.
I think we've
And
covered.
it's not on the agenda particularly, but I just wanted to mention about 430 West 22nd Street. You may recall that we wrote a letter opposing the backyard addition to that site. We recommended denial, and we felt that it was not in conformance to the character of that area, and that it had too much bulk, and it would destroy the house's exterior historic fabric. And Pam very graciously went to the public hearing at LPC, and LPC has not voted on this yet, but Pam was a trooper and stayed through the whole time to give her testimony. Do you want to just say a brief word?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was an interesting afternoon. The meeting went until well beyond 5 o'clock, and we were the last item called to be addressed. In the meeting, there were two other people waiting in line who went home empty-handed at the end of the meeting. So the architects did their presentation. They were, people listened, the commissioners listened, it seemed to me, pretty well. At the end of their presentation, in their presentation, they did make some very minor changes as per from our committee's recommendations for changes, that if the denied didn't stand with LPC, that they should consider making minor changes, and they did make minor changes. The commissioners, each one spoke on this topic. They were kind of, I can't give you the names of the individuals, but they seemed in some part not to have understood the presentation. And indeed, one woman actually said, "I really don't understand why those columns are there," after there had been a thorough explanation of why those columns were there. So that was a little disturbing. 5 of the commissioners, although they had various objections, continued to say, "Well, I don't like this and I don't like that, but I'm going to approve it anyway." 4 of them were less comfortable with approving. And I think that's the reason they did not take a vote. They sent it back. They sent it back to the woodshed to come back. They made recommendations for changes, and that will be discussed at the staff level, and they will be back, and we will be back, I guess. Although I don't think we, at this point, will have an opportunity to have anything to say about it any further.
And Pam, did you say there was somebody there who spoke in favor of the rear yard extension?
Yeah, and this was made an impression and was commented on by Chair Carroll in her discussion at the end of the presentation, which was a person from Chelsea who attended and spoke glowingly in behalf of her neighbor, and that she was very anxious that this should be approved, and that carried a lot of weight. with the chair particularly.
Right, that was a nearby row house owner, correct,
Yes,
Pamela?
it's a nearby row house owner who has, I don't want to say that she was not being absolutely sincere, but of course she owns a house nearby, and when time comes for her to sell that house, I'm sure she would prefer that the flexibility be there to be able to offer it on the market with a whole lot more space available, extending to the rear and extending up, and as we know. Anyway, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, anyway, that was great though, that you put your voice in, and I guess they didn't comment after you gave your testimony, to your testimony. Did they say anything about the board 4 position?
Yeah, they made changes, she said.
Well,
Yes.
Okay, well, the architects did.
They just acknowledged that actually they just acknowledged that I was there from board 4, speaking on behalf of board 4, reading the letter.
Anyway.
But no, there was no further reference
Right.
that I recall to that.
Anyway, thank you very much for sticking it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was interesting enough sitting through all those other presentations.
I always think that I always think that as a reminder that LPC, and this is good to take into perspective, that LPC is a citywide commission, and they had, I think, 6 applications from CB2 in that one day. They had 12 hearings in total to do on that one time, and ours was one of those 12. And that, that's sometimes our frustration with LPC is that they're not paying enough attention to us, but they do a lot of work. And so I just want to.
Yes, they do.
Put that into perspective.
I would again suggest some recommendations for LPC, that maybe they want to do 2 days a month instead of just 1, or however many days they do this, so that they don't all have to sit there for 9 or 10 hours or something. That's exhausting, and they cannot possibly be paying attention. Chair Carroll left the meeting after the 3rd commissioner spoke, giving their ideas of what they thought about this thing. She did not hear most of it. She left. She handed it over to someone else.
Thanks,
I was a little bit surprised that Commissioner Devonshire did not speak at all. He simply said approved. I was a little taken aback by that. It was not a great experience, I will tell you.
But it's useful to tell us, and some of your insights maybe meetings should be every two a month instead of 1 a month. That may be a constructive idea.
Yeah, well, if I were a commissioner, I would certainly rather be able to spend more time and concentrate on the particular presentations rather than just ramming it all through.
I move to nominate Pam Wolf for the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Jesse just put his hand up, so let's.
I second.
Yeah, they actually do. It's twice a month. Yeah, it's usually every other week is what the.
Then it should be 4 times a month.
Yeah, no, I agree with the point. I'm just clarifying the facts. So yeah, but for sure.
Great. All right.
Okay. So
Betty, anything else on that?
I think that's it.
And I just looked at the agenda. I realized there's another item missing that I wanted to talk about today, which is the Penn Station redevelopment. But let's go to agenda item number 4.
Big item.
And let's hear from Varen on the status of our planning fellow.
Hey, do you want to give the committee the background as to what this is, or would you like me to do that?
Yeah, give a brief what it is so that people can be reminded why we have a fellow.
All right. So just some of you might remember, and there was a whole conversation about high vacancy of office space following COVID pandemic, and they still continues, and they still don't, the situation is still fluid. And then on top of it, it got further exacerbated with even higher vacancy with the commercial storefronts, right? So the suggestion was made by Kit that we probably should have a study done irrespective of what city might be doing. And with Jesse's help, we managed to get a fellow from Columbia University. He's a planning student, Derek Bowman, and he's been working on this fellowship, and he's working with us to put together a whole bunch of reports, and particularly sort of a collection of data and making recommendations as to what might be the potential possibilities. So he has started looking at Chelsea and House Kitchen both. Chelsea has much lower percentage of office buildings compared to House Kitchen, which we understand why. So Midtown is sort of major concentration. So he's got sort of bulk of data in place, but it's not fine-grained. So let me just give you a quick update as to where he is. And if you have any questions before I give you a progress update about the study itself, maybe I can stop now and you can ask, or should we just take everything at the end, Paul?
Go on through.
Okay, all right. So what he's done so far is, I'm just reading my notes, he's collected the preliminary data. It's almost complete, but all of the data that we have is what is available from the city, what is available online, what is available from certain organizations, not all of them. I have made some recommendations for him to dig deeper because just to give you an example why that becomes significantly important is because Manhattan office buildings very often are not purely office buildings. They might have other sort of usage in place. And he needs to have that data as well, because, you know, when we look up which office buildings have what percentage of vacancy, what you will typically get is such and such location has 25% vacancy, but it does not take into account the type of vacancy. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. So that's what fine-grained data vacancies he needs to sort of get into. He has also identified all the resources where this data might be available. He's also put together a list of ongoing programs for conversion, which some of them are sort of supported by the city, rest of them are actually initiated by particular sort of landowners and not developers, but landowners, I mean the property owners. He has also collected a bunch of case studies, and personally I'm not too impressed by those case studies because they're not so much about housing, they're sort of adaptive reuse of all different types of buildings. So I need him to kind of fine tune and focus on buildings that actually are adaptive reuse from office to either sort of temporary housing or permanent housing, particularly affordable housing conversions. And one thing that I have thrown at our fellow is that when we are speaking about conversion, a lot of these conversions might not be suitable for affordable housing or housing per se. So you might want to consider these vacancies as community assets and perhaps look at the possibilities of community use, health care related use, even if it is of temporary nature, considering sort of, you know, things that are happening as we know, COVID centers, test centers, vaccination centers, whatever have you. So that is one possibility that I've asked him to think about, at least theoretically. It might not be totally practical, but sometimes these theoretical sort of ideas might prompt other conversations. So I would like him, I mean, I've suggested that he looks into it. He's quite excited about it. The other thing that I want to quickly tell you that he did do some studies last year, looking at actually commercial properties and commercials, not exactly commercial, not exactly office building, but commercial storefronts. So he's going to share that information with us as well, which is a good thing because we always wanted to have the data with us. But what I'm nudging him is to do is that has changed. It's almost 9 months since his study was completed. So I want him to go back and if he has the time to see what has changed. What else do I have to report to you before I take?
Can you tell us sort of a timeline of when he's going to come to us to present his findings?
Yes, actually, I tried to get him for this meeting as well. I actually wanted him to be here, and he is actually unwell, so he couldn't make it. But he has. What I'm suggesting for the committee is that he should probably early part of Jan, after holidays. He should come and speak to the committee first. And my suggestion would be that let's have him attend January CLU meeting, where he can give us a slight, a sort of an interim report, straight from the horse's mouth.
That's great if he's ready. I think that we had originally thought about a May-June timetable for him to be done. So I think it's up to you. I want to point out to everybody two things. One is, this fellowship came about because of the crisis of COVID and the shutdown of shelters and the takeover of hotels and the need for putting a policy in place that gives guidance to how we house our unsheltered people, especially during a crisis. And the ability to have a fellow study this is a great deal of work. And I want to really thank and applaud Viren for spearheading this and monitoring this and staying on top of this and coaching this and mentoring this, because it does take quite a commitment of time. So thank you, Viren, for doing all that.
And one quick thing, Paul, because you just mentioned it, I forgot to mention, he's not only looking at office spaces and commercial storefronts, he's also looking at hotels. And one of the things he's doing is identifying hotels that have already been used as shelter, also potentially the ones that might be candidates for conversion to affordable housing or any other form of supportive housing. So he's going to look at hotels as well.
Great, thanks, Viren. Betty, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, sounds great, Viren. Thank you. And I hope if he's ready to give some preliminary overviews of his summaries of data at January, if our meeting allows it, that would be wonderful. I was wondering if he's also looking at best practices or what other cities have done successfully. Like I gave you guys the article that I found in the Times about a place in California. And I'm wondering if that is also part of his work program now.
It is. I miss speaking about it when I talked about case studies. He's actually looking at both national and international examples. And I have also emphasized one more thing to him, that he should also look at New York City examples, because there are many. So he is going to do local, national, and international examples.
That's fantastic. That's good.
And what he has done so far is not that impressive. So I'm going to actually share a bunch of studies that my students have done at Columbia with him. So that's, we're going to sort of make it into a kind of more comprehensive list.
Right. Thank you. And he's lucky to have you as a supervisor.
No, as a collaborator, no supervisors here.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Viren on the fellowship program? Not seeing any hands go up. So as I mentioned, the agenda does not list this, so I'm going to exercise the privilege of the chair to add an agenda item and give an update on the Penn Station redevelopment project. As you know, almost 2 years ago now, when the ESG first came forward with a plan for Penn Station redevelopment, there was a community advisory committee that had one member of the two community boards appointed to that. Over time, the first plan came out, there was community uproar, elected official uproar, and we've added a working group of which there are 40 members, and there have 4 members from Community Board 4 and 4 members from Community Board 5 on this. We had a series of lengthy, every week, 2-hour-long meetings going through, for 12 weeks, going through each component of the general project plan. For those of you who don't know, a general project plan is essentially the state's privilege of overriding the ULURP process. So they have their own state process for approval of lands, and they bypass the ULURP process. So this working group gave us the opportunity to have some real, I think, very instrumental input into the redevelopment of the Penn Station area. Some of the things that I would point out that we've had some great accomplishments with is that the original plan had 0 housing units. And right now there is a commitment for 500, potentially 1,800 housing units, with a commitment to 30% of those being permanently affordable. That is something that we as a community board have fought very hard for over the years for all development sites, So to have this component added in was a great success on our part. The other thing is that community facility spaces were also not a part of any of the original plan. And now we have sites that have guaranteed community facility space. There's also been an improvement in the amount of open space surrounding the area and a lot of other components to it. The letter we wrote in June of 2020 was a 15-page letter going through point by point all the various issues that needed to be addressed. We did a subsequent letter to the revised GPP that raised a whole variety of issues. And what we're discovering is that the transportation needs, the rail redevelopment, which is underground, is running on a separate track than the general project plan, which is basically the development above grade. So we have transportation needs are happening, and that's one process. And then we have the development of parcels of land. They're selling development rights. The state will increase FAR, sell those development rights to the developer, and then fund the station improvements. And our argument has been that's sort of backwards. We need to figure out what the transportation needs are first, and then figure out what the cost is, and then figure out what we need to sell for development rights to be able to fund that if other sources of funding aren't available. So it's been a long, complicated process, but we should, as a community board, we have really made some great positive impacts on the redevelopment of this area. Going forward, there is another hearing on the draft EIS. They held a hearing a week or two ago. I forget the exact date, but they're going to have another hearing on January 20th. And that will be similar to the one that they just had. I think it's more of a continuation. They had a lot of trouble with the ASL interpreters, and they had problems with the staffing of it and all of this. I think it came as a surprise to them that there were 250 people who would show up and speak at a public hearing about this. And I think they weren't quite prepared for that volume. And so they recognize that, and we'll be having a continuance of the public hearing on January 20th. Another thing that has come out of this is that not only do we have the Community Advisory Committee working group, but now there is a station advisory group that's being formed through ESD that's going to be focused solely on the transportation issues of the redevelopment. And that you saw and approved a letter last full board meeting coming out of Transportation Committee. The Transportation Committee will make sure to have a voice on that new working group that's going to form based on solely transportation transit issues. So I see Mike's hand right up and then Twee. So Mike.
Yeah, if somebody wants to get a quick refresher on the presentation that was given to us, ESD, right? I made an effort to be thorough in the last set of minutes. So it's outlined there. And I think I put in the stuff that's important that you want to go back and look at, including the timeline, which is, not a big timeline, I must tell you. But the stuff is there. So, and it's accurate. And it's my last statement in that role. So I know nobody ever reads the minutes. And I tell you, I don't know if I'm going to either. I know I will for the first couple of months.
Don't say that, Mike. Don't say that.
No,
don't say the incoming secretaries.
No. All other secretaries, I think, have, sort of walked away and said, ooh, maybe not, Anyway, ask Bert. There's one of them right there, Bert. So yeah, that's where it is. If you want to look at it, that's where it is. Okay.
That's terrific. Thank you, Mike. Twee.
5 hours that meeting was. I stayed for the entire time, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. It was, I think, December 8th. And everyone who spoke on CB4, I was really proud and grateful that everyone was able to speak concisely and succinctly. And I was really frustrated with the fact that we had almost 2 years of Zoom and they acted as though it was the first time. So they said, okay, 5 people are up. If you hear your name, get ready. And you'll still have, John Smith, are you there? Yeah. Oh, let's wait 10 seconds. Let's wait 10 more seconds. And that was like pretty much 1/4 of the meeting. It was so frustrating. And then I felt bad for Pam because he called Pam's name And it was probably like 9:40. And I said, well, she probably just threw up her hands and said, that's enough of this. But I believe they actually tried to call Christine Berthet, and I don't know if she was supposed to be speaking. So I had actually listened for my name as well, but unfortunately it didn't come up.
Now
All in all-
no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I only had one question after all of that, because the last on that date was, they said, was comments must be received by January 10. So is that date still set, and then the additional public hearing is after, or did they move that date?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer to. I suspect that they moved the date from January 10th. Let me just point out that, Tui, thank you for the community board 4 members. What we did is the 4 of us who serve on the working group all just signed up to speak, to reserve a slot. But then we were told that we would be given the opportunity to speak right after the elected officials, so we wouldn't just be in the queue with everybody else. So that gave Lowell and I the opportunity to represent the board and speak on behalf of the board. And you'll notice, if you were at the hearing, that CB5 only had the chair testify and nobody else from CB5. So it was great that we had that opportunity to, because, right, I heard the meeting was 5 to 8, so I had dinner plans at 8, and I left at 8, and you all hung in there longer than me, and I went on forever. So thank you for participating in that. And Pam, if you're closed off on that last one, I'd recommend signing up for the January 20th one so you can have your voice heard at that one. But let's go to Bert. Pam, go ahead, and then I'll come back to you, Bert.
The meeting actually started at 5 p.m. and went until after 11.
You're right about that. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, I did. I stuck through the whole thing until about 9 o'clock. And at which point I couldn't do it any longer. So I bagged it. But yes, it was pretty amazing how inept at handling the Zoom they were. And I think that a number of people who had signed up to speak, when they called on them and couldn't find them, I think they just lost the ability to get people into the Zoom somehow. I was surprised about Christine. I was sure she would have plenty to say, and I was
no. Christine waved to it was Lowell, Jeffrey, Christine, and I all signed up, and Christine and Jeffrey ceded to me and Lowell. So their names are on the list, and we were only echoing the hundreds of points that we have complained and screeched about for. I've been in about 75 hours of these meetings, so.
So you had plenty to say. Yes, you spoke very well. I appreciated it. Yeah.
Bert?
I have just a question. So this is all about advisory to the station. Advisory to the station. And you said they're now creating something for the transportation element of the project, for the actual Penn station itself. Will that have community people on it, or is that will just be regional, or technical?
I
didn't need to.
So the transportation issues are going to be run through a national program called NEPA. Much like we have our SECRA process here, there's a national process called, and they'll go through a NEPA process, and it will be just on the rail lines themselves. And MTA will be the lead agency on the revisions to the rail lines and what can go on. And the big thing we're hearing a lot about is the concept of through running. People have probably heard this expression a lot. And there are technically, I think, 3 or 4 plans as to how to deal with the trains coming into and out of Penn Station. One of the alternatives, like there is the plan, this is the plan to keep it as it is. There's a plan to expand north, and there's a plan to expand south. And then there's another through running plan. I think those are the 4. But the rail lines are going to determine what the needs are for New Jersey Transit, Long Island Railroad, Amtrak, and then how that interacts with the existing subway lines that cross. So the trains all run east-west. Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, and Long Island Railroad. MTA tends to run north-south across the tracks that are coming through. And so currently, the southern expansion is what they're saying is the preferred alternative for the expansion of Penn Station. And that would be south into the blocks south of 31st Street, which is the one block in Community District 4 only happens if the southern expansion happens. If the southern expansion does not happen and through running occurs, then those southern three sites don't get impacted at all by the GPP.
And that's the sites where the landmarks are.
Well, the church and the remnant power station are on site 2. The only site in CD4 is site 1. Site 2 is where the church is and where the power station is. Then site 4 is where the Gimble Bridge is and where Hotel Pennsylvania is. So in terms of, and keep in mind that none of them are landmarked, right? So that's the hardest thing we're going through is that, you know, these historically important sites are not landmarked. And so the protections that we want to put in place for those are very, very challenging to overcome when the owners themselves aren't interested in preserving them. So it's an uphill battle for us on those.
The whole NEPA process, if we want to have input, it would be as not any part of it's just as giving testimony.
Well, the way to do it, so I want to just go back to the initial question about the transit, right? So there is a separate transit development track. So we have the GPP for the above grade and then the transportation. Both of those we want to be running at the same timetable. We would prefer the transportation go ahead of the land development so we have a better understanding what the transportation needs are. So that process is a different process and has a different set of input. So there will be separate hearings on just the transportation component of the overall redevelopment. And then there will be separate hearings on the GPP, which is the above grade developments. So there is opportunity for input, both as we go through the GPP and the site development, and then there will be opportunity to have input on the transit issues, the tracks, like think about it, the rail or the tracks, that issue will be a separate opportunity for further input.
Last question. Is there support for our position of doing transportation first?
I would say that there is a sense of the urgency exists for both to happen together. There doesn't seem to be the sense that they want to do it first. And what they're saying is the complicating factor is that in order to get federal funds because this is coming from Gateway Project as well. So the Gateway Tunnel Project is part of this, and then it comes into Penn Station. In order to get federal funding for major redevelopment and infrastructure changes, you have to have the percentage of other state contributions in place. And the legislature is not going to be able to fund a quarter of this project. And so they're looking to the sale of redevelopment rights, the sale of those development rights, the increased FAR, so that they can say to the federal government, we have this funding now lined up. So the federal government will say, okay, now let's move forward with our federal allocation of funding to do the Gateway Tunnel and the rail system. And we had this pressure. I mean, I think that everybody knows that in the last administration, there was no support for the Gateway project. There now is support for the Gateway project. So there's a pressure to move that along so that we can get the Gateway project approved, to get the federal funding in place, but to get the federal funding in place requires state funding to be lined up in advance of that. So that's where this pressure is coming from. There does seem to be general nodding of head that tracks need to be determined before development above grade, but there's other forces in play here. Is that helpful?
Yes, it gives me a perspective. Thank you.
Okay, David, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, I watched the whole 6 hours and I was impressed by, I didn't keep track of pros and cons by number, but to me, it seemed like the testimony was overwhelmingly against the complex, especially if you took out self-interested construction trade representatives. And a lot of the testimony was quite impassioned, and I think the whole 6-hour affair. I think over 200 people signed up to speak, and enough of them hung around to fill that whole evening. I just found the whole hearing a real testament to how deeply unpopular the project is.
Yeah, I will remind everybody that we very rarely, as a land use committee addressing small issues, ever have positive feedback for any development proposal. It's always the antis who come out to public hearings. So let's bear that in mind too, that I agree that there is certainly a lot of public sentiment against this project, the way it is being proposed and the way it's moving forward. And that was certainly echoed at that hearing with 250 people.
Yeah, how often do you get 6 hours and people staying up till 11 o'clock?
Have you been to a BLP meeting? So, Twee?
Yes, to answer your question, yes. I've been to many on my subcommittee.
And Bert's been to those 11 o'clock meetings.
It's true.
And Carrie's been to those 11 o'clock meetings
But
every
yes,
month.
yes. And yes, Dave, you're right. Pam, you're right. It was 6 hours. I lasted for 6 hours. I just discounted one as the waste of time. But I wanted to give Paula a present. I looked it up, and their public notice meeting for that January second public hearing, they said that all written comments can be given by February 22.
Awesome.
By 5
That's
p.m.
great. Thank you, Twee. That's helpful. That means one less. I can cross that off my to-do list now. So thank you. I will point out to everybody that if we think about these delays, like having 250 people show up at a hearing and having ESC recognize that hearing was not complete and extending it for a month is another extension of the redevelopment, giving us the opportunity to really fine-tune all of our points and really hone in on some very critical components of this. So this has been very effective use of community board time, of volunteer time, of community resident time. So we're doing well, I think. So Carrie?
So I'm not sure if this is helpful, but I want to say thank you to everybody who's worked so hard on this. And I feel like this was one of the first things that popped up when I started on this board. And I think Brad actually said what I have felt this whole time is that this is supposed to be a major transit hub for New York City. And we've never heard boo about what the actual transportation piece of this looks like, or, what is the structure of this amazing, new state-of-the-art, as it's described right now, to me, at least, it's one elevator. That's how it sounds like they're adding an elevator. So I continue to be very skeptical of this project. And I do really appreciate all the time and energy that's going into it. I just wish that we had, as you're saying, some better understanding of what is the benefit going to be to the city, to our community and the city as a whole, versus, walking down the West Side Highway and not being able to see the Empire State Building anymore, ever. So I know that's a super oversimplification, but yeah, that's my feelings. And I guess I just wanted to shout out to Brad, who said that from the get-go, I don't get the benefit of the new Penn Station.
No, thank you for that, Carrie, and to Brad. I think that has been echoed pretty vociferously by many of us on the working group, that we're not forward thinking on this. And some of my personal frustrations are that the rail lines that they're looking at expanding are rail lines that will accommodate today's cars, but they're not really thinking about what will train cars of the future be like, and how will they get through these tunnels, and how will they load and unload, and how will they move through. So I think that let's look at, this is supposed to be completed in 2035, and we're building a plan based on 2020 information. And I think that's coming through from a lot of us, that this needs to be better thought through about what's going to happen in 2050. So thank you for that. Thank you for reminding us that, Carrie. Viren?
Well, you just took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say exactly the same thing. I'm too young to be cynical, but this project makes me doubly cynical. I mean, there's absolutely no benefit that I can think about. It is the 20th century plan in the middle of 21st century, and it's supposed to be designed for the 23rd. So I think it fails on every count, and it's very, very unfortunate. But what is obvious to everybody is being ignored totally. What is oh, I'm sorry, you can't hear me, Paul?
I'm sorry, what? Say again, Viren?
Yeah, no, I'm saying what is obvious to everybody is not, is being ignored by the sort of, ESD totally. And yes, you're right. It's not just the manner in which the car might change, but everything else along with it would change, right? The way we sort of commute is going to change. The city, the way it functions is going to change. We're talking about live-work situation, hybrid typologies and hybrid morphologies, right? So, I mean, if we're talking about conversion of office buildings to housing, we basically are saying you live and work in the same building, pretty much. So the commuting gets tossed out. So anyway, all I'm saying is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And Brad, I'm proud to know that I have mentioned drone delivery. So everybody.
Right. No, I mean, not to be flippant, but just to be sort of very sincere about it. I think this project does call for a lot more input from the public. And I think it's not a singular vision. And what is being driven down our throats is a singular vision that is completely lopsided.
Yeah, I thank you for that, Baron. It is echoing a lot of the sentiment. And as I pointed out at the beginning of this discussion, the movement we have made in the short time already in terms of the changes to the plan have significant changes. And we hope that we can continue to make further changes as we move along. So, Pam?
So what is so obvious is that the through running, if through running could be accomplished, and if Madison Square Garden could be gotten rid of, and the station brought up to grade, and we would have a magnificent train station and a magnificent way to enter the city, and have our guests and visitors to come to a gorgeous structure. Wouldn't that make a lot of sense?
Well, Pam,
is that so totally unrealistic?
Yes.
That
yes.
It's not worth fighting for?
No, I'm not saying it's not worth fighting for, but that the notion that through running is the solution is not necessarily true. It is a position that one organization has taken. It's a position I'm probably leaning closest to getting to, but they haven't proven that it can function yet and it can work. We have serious political repercussions from suggesting that we move development from Midtown Manhattan to the lower socioeconomic areas of the Bronx, and that we think that is the solution, when that is not necessarily the best way to strategize on those things.
Wait, you're losing me here. Why are we talking about the Bronx?
In order for through running to operate, it has to, the terminal has to be someplace else. Right now, the terminal is at Penn Station. The terminal would need to move to either the Queens or Bronx. And one of the through running proposals by the organization that you're quoting from is to have that happen in the Bronx. And so there is a political issue as well surrounding this movement of these large towers that we all oppose in Midtown, for us to say, let's move them to the Bronx, because that's what would happen is the development would just move to the terminal. And so there are many layers involved in this. And again, I think that there are solutions, and I think through running should be better examined than it has been. And I think through running is very potentially a very good solution. If through running occurs, that then also eliminate Midtown. So it could work to the benefit of a lot of different factors here. But it is not the definitive solution. And the second thing is Madison Square Garden. Relocating Madison Square Garden is also not a simple solution. And right now, the current thought is to move Madison Square Garden to Hudson Yards, which many of us remember the fight against putting the stadium into Hudson Yards. So moving Madison Square Garden to Hudson Yards, is that necessarily the solution we want to fight for? So all of these things come into play. And one of the thoughts I have on Madison Square Garden is, let's start collecting taxes from them and have them contribute money so that we don't have to sell as many development rights to pay, and then we don't have as tall of towers if we can get more money out of other sources. So there's a lot of different moving parts here, and I hate to say that one is a definitive solution over another until we have much more information about that. So I'm hopeful that through running could prove to be effective, because that would save 3 midtown blocks from a southern expansion. But no one has shown that that is the solution yet.
But
Except
that's
for-
not the only advantage. That would certainly not be the only advantage of having through running, is to rescue those 3 blocks. But it's Madison Square Garden sitting there like a giant malevolent mushroom on top of
And
our basement facility.
And the argument we have made is Madison Square Garden, they make the argument that Madison Square Garden is owned by them and can't be moved without Madison Square Garden approving it. And we're saying, then how dare you say you can raise another block south of it and not move Madison Square Garden? So those conversations are ongoing. We have been very vocal about alternatives to all of that.
So isn't their lease up, the ground lease up next in 2023? Madison Square Garden?
No, I don't think it's something else. It's their terms of agreement with the city are up in 2023, but they own the land there.
They do not own the land.
That's what I've been told, is that they own the land there. I've been told they own the land there.
They own the columns that sit on top of the track of the platforms. They own those columns.
From what I have been
not
told,
the land that they sit on.
From what I've been told by the city people who are involved in this large working group is that Madison Square Garden owns the land. Amtrak controls. It's more that I believe the terms are that Amtrak, and I need to be correct on this if I'm wrong, that Amtrak leases from Madison Square Garden technically. So it's a little more complicated.
I'd like that particular
solution.
point to get explored.
Absolutely.
I'd like to hear more about that.
That is absolutely something that is being explored, is how do we deal with Madison Square Garden? 100%. Everyone is looking at that as a possibility of moving that. And if Christine was on this call, she would say, we've been fighting for an above grade station all this time. And so figuring out how to get that. And if we have to do the southern expansion and raise those 3 city blocks, that the focus should be on one of those blocks being an above grade station, not an office tower, or have the office tower above that make the focus a station with offices above it, rather than having it be office towers with just an entrance into a station. So yeah, I think we're all going in the same direction. Some of us are just not as vociferous about what the absolute solutions are just yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I respect Rethink and their position on this and their efforts to lobby on behalf of their cause. And it's a very effective effort. Bert, your hand.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to extend our meeting to 11 o'clock. I do though. When you said through running, ending in Queens or ending in the Bronx, that threw me, because I've grown up believing what they did in Philadelphia, what they've done in a lot of cities. Through running is the train goes from Princeton to New Haven. The train goes from Ronkonkoma out to, that way, Marlboro.
Right. Like Amtrak.
Stopping in the Bronx.
Right. Amtrak goes from Virginia to Boston, right? And so that is a through running of Amtrak through Penn Station.
I was thinking through running of commuter trains. New Jersey
you're right, Bert. But both of them, as you just pointed out, each of those through running still does have a terminus at some point. New Jersey Transit will reach a terminal. They're going to stop and turn around and go back at some point. Right now, that is Penn Station is the last stop. They sometimes store in Sunnyside, and then they come back through again. Long Island Railroad comes into Penn Station and stops, and they stack up their trains in Hudson Yards, and then they turn around and go back out. So this through running proposal is to extend New Jersey Transit farther east and extend Long Island Railroad farther west so that the trains can get through the station faster. And they load and unload like a subway.
I understood through running is through the region, not just through the station.
Well, but
And I know there's institutional problems between New Jersey Transit and MTA, but you get on a train in Princeton and you can go all the way to New Haven.
but the two through running proposals for New Jersey Transit, their terminus is either in Queens or in the Bronx. If you look at the,
Take a look at. that you
yeah,
can-
there is some, the rethink group.
You can link
I-
it to-
I have- Yeah, so that, and then to continue at the Long Island Railroad would continue over to Secaucus.
That's
So,
not- it's not through running. That's just.
But it means,
It's just
as you point out, your point is echoed here, Bert. Like when you mentioned the through running examples, you mentioned terminals. Everything has to have a terminal. And right now the terminal is Penn Station, and technically we shouldn't be a terminal, we should be a station, and we are a terminal right now. Brad, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, Paul, thanks. I understand we're fighting and we're happy that we've got some, affordable housing or more units, but these are high-end developments. It's like Hudson Yards coming there. I mean, I just don't understand how we're fighting for something where we don't know what it is. And that's really disturbing. And I know we're negotiating for something without any parameters. And I just, I emailed our new current chair coming up saying, this is a major battle. And I think we got to focus on the larger picture before we try to negotiate for anything else. And that's just my opinion. I think it was said earlier, this design, this thought process is backwards. And I think you said it too, Paul. So I appreciate all your work. Look forward to the new year and more discussions and more wins.
Thanks, Brad. And yeah, and I will repeat that, because of the pressure on the timelines to get this approved, we feel like they have gone back almost fully to the drawing board, and it's now been a 1.5 year extension. And I point out the accomplishments we've made because those weren't in the first plan, and originally this would have already been approved under the original schedule. And the fact that we've gotten to where we have, and as I mentioned when Twee said the schedule is further extended, gives us the opportunity to continue fighting those fights, Brad, that, let's rethink this whole thing. Viren?
And just quickly clarify, Pam is right. The land is not owned by MSG. They only own the structure, and they have 10-year operating permit. But the land is owned by the city.
And Paul, this is what I was trying to get at. I'm sorry, Vera. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you, Vera.
That, what is the board's view? I mean, it'd be nice to say two things. We love MSG. We want to move it, and we want to open up that whole area to an amazing commercial and transportation hub that benefit our region alone, NYC.
So Brad,
And when we are picking at certain things, I don't know, I hear now we're going to have a transportation group to talk about the railways. I just think it would be nice to have one cohesive thought that we're trying to get at. And if the mantra is move MSG, open it up like that presentation that we received about 3 years ago of reusing MSG, structure. I mean, I think that was amazing. And Paul, I agree with you. You had to fight to get to where you are. I get it. But I would like, a group vision on what we are fighting for. So it's two things. Here's move MSG. Here's the vision right here. How do we pay for it? What's going on around it? I just think, thank you, Paul.
No, I completely understand your frustration on this, and I will tell you a layer of frustration that I experienced 3 weeks ago when I was writing the last board letter, in that MSG is not in our district. So for this board to take a position on a building that is not in our district would open up Community Board 5 coming in and telling us what to do with Port Authority. Open up Community Board 5 telling us what to do with Hudson Yards. Opening up Community Board 5 coming in and telling us all these other things. So we do have to be respectful of the fact that MSG is not in our district. And so how do we, address the fact that relocating it, and that even for them to say they want to move MSG into Hudson Yards, right? Now, if they say that, we have, then we can opine on where MSG is relocated to, because we're moving into our district. There is a plan to move MSG within Community District 5. And Community District 5 has been very clear in their message that they want MSG relocated. So that effort is underway pretty solidly from that perspective. And I think that's where we stand behind them. And our
Paul,
language.
this is why we leave it to the chairs to figure out the politics of that. I mean, for us not to be able to comment on one of the biggest transportation within a half a block of us is a bit, I'm sorry, I'm not going to accept that we're stepping on somebody's toes.
No, but
that's my opinion. We also can write letters about the environment for the entire New York City area. So right. I get what you're saying. I don't want to drag it on, but I get your point.
No, but I think, and I think you will see that we have taken some very hardline positions. We use language like, if MSG is to stay where it is located, then they have to contribute funds to the redevelopment of the area, which they're not currently in the plan. And we, because the funding is what's driving the development, which does directly impact our district. And if you also look at the redevelopment plans, the only site with required housing is in our district. Like that, that change in the overall plan, that was driven by, we really pushed hard for housing, and all that housing is now in our district because it shadows Penn Self Cooperative, like that, so we try to balance that fine line, Brad, and I appreciate that frustration. I seriously appreciate that frustration because I have experienced it wholeheartedly. Varen, you have more to add in. It is getting to 15, so.
No, I think I agree with you. I mean, CD5 has a position, and we can take a position to support that position, so to speak. And that itself could be quite meaningful in the whole entire process, because they actually even have some plans that they sort of entertained. Alternate plans, so to speak, right? And I think that is a very good position to support. I'll tell you why, because this is such a large project, right? We don't want another Hudson Yards repeating. We fell for it. This board fell for it. And it's a very regretful situation that we are in right now, right? So, and this is for the citywide situation. Do we want to create another Hudson Yards scenario? Or take a position that actually points it out?
Yeah, it's very valid issues and all very good statements. And I'm feeling all of these frustrations, and
we don't have to have all the answers, bro. It's not on you. You're not defending anybody. I don't want to put this on you guys. Come on now, let's stop it.
No. But listen, I actually am glad that we've been having this conversation, because I can hear from all of you and what your perspectives are. When I go into the working group and I'm sitting with the other 3 board members from Community Board 4, we have 1/10 of the site of this development. And I think that we as a board have been very effective in shifting the dialogue, and I think more effective than many of the other participants of the working group in getting a lot of these changes made, because we are, reasonable, logical, thoughtful, insightful, and forward thinking, and more so than some of the other people that sit in the working group. So I think I appreciate all the comments everyone's making, because it reinforces the issues that we have to fight for. Marty?
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. I know that we can't solve all this tonight, and I just want to make 2 comments about what you said, Paul. I think the most important is that the divide about this plan, the divide between CB4 and we need to figure out how to eliminate the divide between CB4 and CB5, because we, CB4 and CB5, need to have a holistic plan, not a piecemeal plan. And the frustration that you've been expressing that we can't step on CB5's feet messes up the ability to be holistic about it. The second thing I'd like to say is your concern about terminal versus station. If the through trains go through Penn Station to a terminal, whether it's Queens or the Bronx, that won't change the fact that most people will be getting off at Penn Station. They won't be getting off at the Bronx or Queens. And so that doesn't change that the trains go through. The idea of the trains going through is to relieve the pressure on the trains in Penn Station. And you still have to deal with the people getting off at Penn Station. Thanks. That going forward, that needs to be in the conversation.
Yeah, Marty, thank you for that. And on the first of all, I hope I'm not portraying that CB4 and CB5 are at odds with one another. We are working very well together, but we as a board and our language have to be careful about some of the words and what we choose to say and how we say it. We are clearly in support of, our letters always say we support CB5 and their efforts. We echo it. We work well with them. We have a good relationship with the chairs of their land use committee, their transportation committee. So, and we are working very well together. So I hope I'm not portraying that there is any sort of tension or conflict between the two boards. And the second point you make, Marty, is very critical, and that how we move people through this network. So the people come out of the trains at Penn Station and they come up, there is a percentage that goes west, and there will be more that will go towards Hudson Yards as we go forward. Right now, 60% of people from Penn Station go east into the 5th community district, right? So how those people move about, and I've been arguing for a long time.
But not to Queens.
No, you're right. But I think the point that people movement has to be a focus, and that's really an important component. Where the trains land at the end of it is another component that needs to be discussed, and where those trains, what yards they sit in, where they get serviced, what equipment is out there. And to be honest, in my opinion, what development opportunities exist for Queens people to be able to get to jobs in Secaucus? Like there's economic opportunity across the region. As Bert points out, it's a regional connection then, and not just a terminus. So, Hector?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I wanted to say thank you for putting in all this time and effort, everybody who's involved with that work group. I know it's very time consuming. I really echo some of the other voices that I've heard here, like Brad, mentioning stuff like drones, for example. Yeah, it's kind of disheartening to hear that the Port Authority is looking at, not future-proofing, which is really what we need. Because honestly, like as you said, it's already going to be outdated by the time it's completed. So it's really, and honestly, it seems to be a never-ending cycle with the city where they basically invest money and for the immediate and not planning for the future. So, and what they end up doing in 10, 20 years is reinvesting more money to try to get it up to speed again, like playing catch up all over again, rather than being proactive about it. So, I really appreciate all the voices I've heard here today and all the ideas that are being thrown around, because everybody here seems to be really on the money. And then in relation to CB5, yeah, I mean, they have as much stake in this as we do. So honestly, I think it's a good point that you brought up that, hey, maybe the garden gets moved to the Hudson Yards possibly. I mean, it's an option. So at that point, it does impact us. So, they have to be open to our suggestions as well. I mean, so we can all, come up on top with all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. I appreciate it. All right. So, as you all know, anytime you have any thoughts on this, feel free to call me, email me, whatever. I'm always open to hearing more about this. And I love talking about this stuff, so I'll talk about it ad nauseum with anybody. But I would like to wrap it up for tonight because we are getting close to 8:30. And the last item we had on the agenda, Pam?
Yeah, just one quick shot here. Let us all just keep in mind that this is the only shot we're going to get at this. Once these decisions all get made, we're locked in, and this is the only shot we will have and it's for decades and generations and centuries from here on. So this is the most important thing we've got going here. I just wanted people to realize you only get one grab at the ring. Thanks.
Thanks, Pam. All right, so the last item we put on the agenda is to think about sort of any future initiatives that the committee wants to take. I mean, keep in mind that the purview of the land use committee is to review ULURP and GPP and applications that come forward, and 95% of our time on this committee is spent reviewing things that come before us, and that drives our schedule, that drives our calendar, and that drives what we do. This month, we had no applications to review, and I thought it would give us the opportunity to think about, is there something we as a committee would want to tackle in terms of land use or zoning or a program that we can push forward rather than being reactive to everything. We could push something forward. And the example that Viren was talking about with the fellow program, right? We have an opportunity to talk about how do we set land use policy on housing conversion, and we're running a fellow program, being very methodical about it, pulling together some very good ideas and plans that come throughout the entire district, right? This started with Hell's Kitchen because they were hit hardest with the hotels during the COVID crisis. But it then turned into a district-wide, how do we deal with hotel conversions? And then can we convert commercial space into residential? And we now have a fellow who's doing a study that we hope will come out with some sort of policy recommendation that will come from this committee to go to the board to then hopefully move up to the city level and maybe have an impact. And so I just wanted to open up the discussion to see if there were any issues that people thought we as a committee could be a little bit more proactive. Some examples that come to mind are, when we reviewed the zoning flood resiliency ZTA, how do we deal with building code on future developments that are flood proofing? Maybe we look at how do we build buildings that have renewable energy sources as part of the construction process and have everything have solar panels on it. And is that a zoning issue? Is that a land use policy issue? How do we tackle that? We always laugh with, is Brad still on? Brad looked like he dropped off. Do we want to have a zoning code resolution on drone delivery docks on all new buildings? Do we want to have a building stabilization plan policy guidelines for LPC so that future sites that old buildings aren't being built, they have a policy put into place that we help construct and move forward? And so I just wanted to see if people had any ideas of thoughts that something that you would want to try to tackle in the year going forward. And that's kind of what I wanted to open up to. So I see Marty's hand first, then Pam, then Viren.
Thank you. I think the list that you just articulated is a really wonderful one. My comment is a little bit more retrospective, and it comes from the conversation that we had about the landmarking of the colored school number 4. I'm the chair, co-chair of the Environment Committee, and one of the things that I do a terrible job at is following up from things that we have decided. I don't have a methodology, and I don't think this committee does either. I don't have a methodology for regularly following up, for putting a calendar or having a spreadsheet, and that in 6 months I can have that thing come to my attention and say, oh, it's time to follow up on colored school number 4 or any of the items that you mentioned. And I think one of the things that we as chairs might need to help each other with of committee and the committees themselves is figure out how to do that better. I'm sure that Jesse will have some of this already going, but I think it's not something that we do as a community board as a whole. We don't follow up on what we have done, and we need to figure out how to do that better.
I I wholeheartedly agree, Marty. And as co-chair, it's one of the big struggles. Is what we vote on things, then it goes into an abyss, and we never find out. Which is part of the reason why I wanted to do this year-end in review. Right, it gives us the opportunity to talk about some of the things we did accomplish. But you're right. There is no system in place that anything we vote on and make a recommendation on, then the agency that takes action is forced to notify a community board, and that's a citywide issue, right? And like SLA doesn't tell BLP when their licenses have been approved. LPC doesn't tell land use. DOT doesn't tell transportation. Like that's a systemic problem. So, and if you want to tackle with a solution.
Well, I think it begins with making, I don't know whether it's a spreadsheet or not, but taking the colored school number 4 and putting it on somebody's calendar, or probably Jesse's calendar. I'm not sure that I put it on here.
Let's get more work on Jesse's plate. Jesse, how do you feel?
Well, I think it's something that committee chairs need to say.
Yeah.
This is something that needs to be on a rotating calendar. I'm not sure. What I'm saying needs to be worked out, but it needs to happen.
So, before you go on, Jesse, I do want to say that what I'm hoping this conversation leads to is people stepping up and saying, this is what I want to tackle in the next year, not here's a problem, but let's try to find somebody. So Marty, do you want to step up and create that spreadsheet for everybody?
I'd be willing to work with people on it, certainly.
All right, sorry, Jesse, go ahead and let's get some insight.
So it's not, a couple committees have similar concerns, and a couple committees already do this well. I mean, I can share what transportation planning does. Christine Berthet, the queen of the spreadsheet, does this very well. If I will say again, we can certainly do it, and so it's not an issue. But I think it does require someone from the board, updating that and tracking that and things like that. And so. That's done with Christine with some support from Janine. So I'm happy to work with someone who wants to do that. I would say though, I think we don't need to recreate the wheel for the land use applications. So, I mean, I think there's already a tracking system that's called the city government. They do a really good job of telling us when everything is due and when all of that. So I think maybe if we're talking about like certain items that we need to like try to be able to get the developer or the applicant to agree to, that's fine. But I'm happy to share what transportation planning does as an example, and we can go from there.
Awesome, thanks, Jesse. Pam, you were next.
Yeah, I think I'm going to defer to David because I think he's going to talk about what's on my mind as well, having to do with LPC, and I think my own thoughts are way too radical for this group. So I'm going to let David calm me down.
Oh, come on, don't be chicken.
No, you're on, kid.
But let me just interject on that for a second. So Pam, I don't think anything is radical. I think that what it will require is somebody saying, this is an approach we can take to solve the problem and come up with some sort of guidelines going forward. And so the ideas may be radical, but it's the solutions that we want to look for.
Well, I think part of the problem is the political interference with landmarks, which is inevitable. The chair and the commissioners are appointed by the mayor. The city charter actually defines what the makeup of the commission is. It says there need to be 3 architects, 1 historian qualified in the field, which I think means historic preservationist. At the time these rules were written, it was the mid-1960s, and the Landmarks Commission was getting created right alongside the creation of the first schools of historic preservation in the nation, largely in response to the demolition of Penn Station and urban renewal. There's also supposed to be a realtor and 1 city planner or landscape architect on the commission and 1 resident of each borough. I'm not sure they actually do that. And they serve for from 1 to 3 years. And the commissioners themselves are volunteers like we are. They go in every other Tuesday. It's a big commitment for them, but they aren't part of LPC policymaking. All they do is what we do, when something is presented to us. They view the presentation, they weigh in on it, they vote yay or nay. The landmarks chair does have a lot of discretion. And I think that where we've seen landmarks go off the tracks in the past, it may be because of political oversight. And the landmarks chair, in fact, reports to the deputy mayor for economic development, which is not something you would ordinarily think of as being that would mix well with historic preservation. A lot of people really didn't think that was the case when Alicia Glenn was the deputy mayor for economic development. That's when landmarks ordered the demolition of the oldest house in Chelsea. And my understanding is that sometimes a chair can threaten commissioners with removal. And the commissioners, it's hard to say to what extent they're motivated simply by good civics and to what extent it's self-serving. Often their role as a landmarks commissioner will be something that they advertise for their private sector firms. And, you know, it's a way of saying, look, if you have a project that needs to go before the Landmarks Commission, I can guide you through it.
So what is the solution you're proposing, David?
Well, I think what Pamela had in mind and what we've talked about a little bit is possibly proposing a change to the city charter so that the makeup is changed. And instead of all of these folks being mayoral appointees, maybe the borough president gets an appointee or two, or the city council speaker, so that there's a certain amount of independence among them.
If you want, I think those are legitimate concerns, and I think that if you want to start thinking about a charter revision, and specifically what language would you want to change in the charter, and then bring it here for this committee to discuss, and then for the board to discuss. Changing the city charter, as you know, requires a citywide vote, so it's a massive undertaking, and so if we want to do that, and you want to lead on that, it will take years for that to happen. The city charter had to be changed to change our term limits, right? That was a city charter change. So that's a very robust and long-term issue, which I think we may be term limited out before a city charter could change. So I think that I think if you want to do that, then I suggest come up with some very specific thoughts on how it would be done, what the specific word changes you would like to propose, and draft that, bring it here. We could discuss it as a committee, then we can bring it to board and then move it through the channels that way. But,
okay, and I have one more idea, which I may have brought up with you before, I don't know. But if you remember a month or two ago, we had sort of a few of us met independently with an architect who was proposing changes to the rear of a row house in the Chelsea Historic District, which had previously earned a permit from LPC for a very large addition. And I looked into the records for that house, and that approval was given to a previous owner who, before building the addition, sold the house for a very high profit, simply by virtue of having the permit to enlarge the house in hand. And I think that happens fairly frequently. That's what the guy who bought the oldest house in Chelsea did. He got the permit to replace it with a house twice the size and put it back on the market for 1.5 times his cost without spending $1 on construction. So these row houses are a little bit like sitting ducks to developers who come in and they get approval for gigantic additions, and landmarks can always say, well, it's as of right for zoning, and zoning isn't our bailiwick. And one of the reasons these houses get gutted is because the existing basement level can be lowered by just a foot or two. And that puts the median height between the basement and the ceiling of the basement at below sidewalk level, which means that they don't count as zoning square footage. All you need to do is lower that basement a couple of feet, and you can add an entire floor to the top of the building or the top and the back of the building. And it just invites gutting the house, and it invites facadism. So I would be looking maybe for a zoning text amendment that at the very least gets rid of that doesn't allow you to qualify to have your basement not count, or even a sub-basement or a sub-sub-basement. The oldest house in Chelsea, they proposed lowering the basement and putting in an entire floor below it that went the full depth of the lot. It's just inviting.
Again, I think a zoning text amendment is certainly a much easier process than a city charter amendment. So I think that as we're moving through this discussion, you're getting to something that's a little bit more manageable, I think. And so to come up with some language that you think, because David, I think I agree with the philosophy that, a lot of times we feel frustrated with LPC because there are rules and policies in place and they're following the rules and policies and that we don't agree with them. And the way to change that is not to keep yelling at them about the oldest house in Chelsea and the problems there, but rather change the policy so that that doesn't happen in future sites. So if you can come up with some ideas on a zoning text amendment and the specificity of how that would be written, and again, how that would be passed citywide, right? Like we realized with the zoning text amendment on flood resiliency is that the difference between the Rockaway Beach area versus West Chelsea, and it's one citywide zoning text amendment, it has to encompass all of them. So yeah, I think if you can come up with some ideas on how to address basement expansions that lead to gut renovation of historic homes, let's find some language and again, bring it forward. But let's have that policy solution as a recommendation and then see if we can follow a course that we can do that. I saw Jesse's camera come on. Jesse's head is about to explode, I think.
No, I was just going to say, I think both things are, listen, I think charter commissions happen, right? There's going to be, I'd be beyond believably surprised if there wasn't some charter commission happening in the next 4 years. I mean, I think the argument that what you're going to do is trying to say when that charter commission happens, that you guys want to advocate for what David is, right? I mean, if you guys agree, right? If the committee agrees and the board agrees, you're on record for saying when and if the next charter commission happens, the charter commission should be looking at X, Y, or Z, right? And this is what we should be doing. So you're sort of creating this letter, for this lack of a better term, this letter, and it's being, it's not, you're not sending it, you can send it around, but who you're really wanting to send it to is the next charter commission. And so we'll have to do that when that happens, but doing it now or later doesn't really matter. It's better actually now, maybe, because you'll have more time to craft it and get it ready. So I think that's fine. I think a text amendment is, I think Paul is right in terms of just the timing of everything. The text amendment, it is a land use application there, and it's so someone needs to be actually leading that. On a rare occasion, the city sort of does it themselves, as we've seen recently, but normally they're sometimes connected to a different application. So we'll have to figure out the realities of who would actually be leading that application. But again, I think that's can be figured out as we go along and as we build momentum or let's say a coalition, as David wants to work on this. So I think that's fine too.
And in terms of the zoning text amendment, another way of avoiding having to go citywide could be that we would do it in certain special districts or parts of community District 4, rather than trying to get a whole big thing for the city. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it relates specifically to English basements, as they're called, which are characteristic of Greek Revival row houses that are so much what the Chelsea Historic District is made out of.
So that might be a way of narrowing it down.
Thank you, David. That's good. Viren, your hand went up.
Yes, I think Jesse kind of covered what I was about to say. So I thank you, Jesse. I was just about to say that charter revision is long overdue, and there's a lot of stuff that is happening as we speak in terms of number of revisions that other people, even within city government, are thinking about. One example I can throw at you is that city actually now has a racial justice commission, and that's actually looking to make some changes to charter because they are questioning a lot of land use and zoning policies, which are sort of segregationist and discriminatory. So I think the climate and the temperature might be just right for us to sort of think about sort of more coordinated proposal as to what all we would like to see changed. And that might actually get more sort of, momentum. So not only just the LPC part of it, but for example, the sort of text amendment for flooding, right? Now that's a much bigger issue. And all they're speaking about, my personal frustration is, all they're speaking about are building seawalls, but that's not going to solve the problem, because water is going to find its own level, water is going to flood the bloody place one way or the other, right? That's not going to solve anything. We need to have a much more comprehensive approach to it. One more example that I'll throw at you. While we're actually building seawalls, we're still dumping our CSO into the river. And that's actually raising sort of water level as much as flooding is doing it, right? So we're not looking at the actual solutions, we're just sort of solving piecemeal problems rather than looking at it holistically.
Yeah.
So just to make it very short, it's late, but thank you, Jesse. I think it's a good way of approaching this, and this should be actually across the committees and not simply CLU. I think every committee should think about what all they would want to see changed in the charter. So that way, this community board can go and put forward an agenda item for them to consider.
Great, thanks, Farron. Yeah, and as I say, this was because we didn't have an application, and this was an opportunity to meet and just give some thought to, are there things this committee wants to do to be more proactive in 2022, much like we're doing with the housing policy with this fellow. And if there's something people want to tackle, it takes, as Viren will attest, it takes a great deal of time and energy and commitment to make a small minor change in a zoning code. So it's a commitment of time and energy.
And I will further volunteer, if anyone wants to discuss charter revisions, I'm happy to have that conversation. So count me in.
Viren, didn't you tell me that you have a problem that you always over volunteer for everything?
Just so everybody understands, Viren has volunteered for everything, so you have there's a long line.
He doesn't sleep. Oh, I wanted to.
Yeah, go ahead, Betty.
Make a suggestion. What we were talking about earlier about requiring a developer of a historic building or row houses or whatever it is, and it's really old, that they submit a structural stabilization plan before they touch the building. And that somehow that must be part of their approach, or that LPC has to require that. Does anybody get that?
Jesse seemed to react.
Yeah, well, I thought that was actually a really good part of the conversation when the 14th Street and 9th Avenue buildings came up initially, which would, I think we recognized what I think we were all very frustrated with, and what was sort of been, alluded to in today's conversation about the meeting that they had with DOB and LPC, is that, again, LPC just doesn't have the teeth that it wants or needs. And we want to make sure that it does. So when an application like this, or when a building like this comes before you guys, that, when something like this happens and no one's surprised because we've seen this before, we don't want that to happen again. And so, and part of this is, and it goes, all of the power goes to DOB. And I think that's something to think about, connected to what Betty's talking about. And I think Pam and David sort of talked about it when we initially had the big post conversation after we've heard about the DOB order, was that, LPC should be taking the lead. We shouldn't be, it should be completely LPC directing these owners they made it a commitment, they made a promise, they got an approval from the city to do it. And now because it's an unsafe building, it all goes to DOB. And so I thought that was something that could be looked at. I don't know. I don't have the answer right now. We don't have the answer, right? That's not what this conversation is about. But in terms of putting a conversation and writing to our future council member and writing to the future chair of the landmarks subcommittee and advocating for legislation, like local law to be created that gives LPC, you know, the strength and the policy and the commitment to do what we want them to do, you know, or take the lead at least with consultation with DOB or something along those lines. You know, I mean, we can figure out what the word says, but I thought that was really productive. That could be a really across the city because it's a local law.
Yes,
could be, really
could be. Yes.
So David or Pam, are you interested in sort of tackling that as an issue and taking the lead on it?
You know, one thing I would remind you is that if this is kind of in response to 14th Street and 9th Avenue, the story there is that the developer didn't cause the damage to the buildings that caused them to need to be taken down. That they simply uncovered it when they did the removal of the plaster on the inside surface of the walls. They discovered that the facades couldn't be saved. I think there already are rules in effect that you can't damage a landmarked building. And they then, in fact, stabilized the buildings, as we seem to be calling for, only as a prelude to completely disassembling them and putting them back together.
But David, you're going through the history, and what Jesse is recommending is we come up with the solution and look at what has been their practice in the past and what is the solution, and how can we establish a policy guideline and get the city council member to propose legislation or LPC to adopt a rule, or how do we go about changing that problem?
In other words,
Varen's hand is, Varen's been trying to bump in here, but Varen, you can't volunteer for one more thing.
No, I'm not going to. I think there's sort of related point that I want to make, what Jesse said and what David was just talking about. I think one of the things is that we had to put preservation back in LPC. So in other words, they identify buildings, and these are landmark buildings, they landmark them, but then there's no follow-up, in the sense that once the buildings are landmarked, there should be some way of then keeping an inventory of the conditions of those locations and those buildings. They don't have that. So what, you know, your building gets landmarked, you're not too happy about it because you can't sell the air rights, you can't do this and that. So you let it sort of fall apart slowly. So how do you put what could be the policy change that you could request for that would make sure that there's an inventory of all landmark properties, and there is a way for LPC, with the help of DOB potentially, or any other agency that they can think about, to keep track of what the conditions of these buildings are on an ongoing basis, or require the owners to submit reports of soundness of this building, something of that nature. That could be meaningful.
Pam?
That's DOB's job. That would be DOB's job, and they already have that job to survey buildings and establish what buildings might be in jeopardy of falling down and landing on people. That's part of DOB. I don't think LPC hasn't got the teeth to.
Right. No. So the question becomes, Pam, how do we get LPC to have the teeth that you want them to have? If this pattern that we have identified, that somebody comes into a landmark building and they start doing soft demolition, and then suddenly it's a public safety hazard, and DOB steps in and DOB says public safety supersedes preservation, and LPC is then bumped out of the room. Is there something we can do to avoid that pattern from happening in the future? And what policies do we need to promote to make that the case? So your response, Pam, is exactly the problem that we're trying to tackle, right? You just said, oh, that's DOP's job, but we don't want it to be.
No.
So what policy do we need to change to make it not be DOB's job? And
this
make it
would be a whole new arm of LPC, of engineers in the field doing surveys, going to every landmark, every every house in every historic district on a regular basis, examining interior and exterior. That's a whole new department we're talking about. And that would need to be funded a lot more than LPC is funded.
Or you can put the onus back on the owner to provide reports.
And you trust those reports? That's the whole problem
it has
here.
it has to be an independent.
Tavros was.
Can I? We're getting into the nitty gritty here. I think
yes,
all
we
agree what this is, this is something we think is a good idea. I think we should just put it on our Marty's list that Marty's going to create and track, right? and we should start,
That's a really bad idea.
Holding meetings with people in the new year and coming up with a proposed legislation, and then having that presented to you guys. And again, all of the wording doesn't have to be specific, because they're not going to take our wording word for word anyway. There's a bunch of lawyers at City Council that are going to, take it and turn it around into a possible intro, right? That then gets sent to committee, and that then we need to go to that committee hearing and advocate for, and get all of the other community boards to go to advocate for. So it's a long path, and I think though it's a valid thing to be arguing.
So your comment about going to all the other community boards to get them on board with it, that's a very important part of this, that we would need to be prepared to reach out to other community boards like 2 and 5 specifically.
I don't think that's, in the world of Zoom, it's no longer, it's actually quite easy. So I think we could, I think if we do our homework and shop it around to some of the other groups and see, we'll have to take creative criticism on it and come back with it and see if we can get at least a Manhattan majority, and but we'll you guys spearheading.
We have to get it through this committee. We have to get it through this committee first, and then our board. There's still those obstacles before we even go to other boards. So, but the notion of tackling this, because it's an identified problem, it's been an ongoing problem, and if we want to work on a solution rather than every time it happens we scream and yell and gnash our teeth about it, let's instead come up with some policy guidelines so it doesn't happen in the future. Mike, your hand. Betty, go ahead. Betty, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure that it's a policy guideline. In my head, it's a requirement for developers. In my head, that's what it was. But I mean, it's getting late, and I think we have a variety of ways that we could try to approach this. So, I would be willing to be part of a couple of other people who we could, kind of look at the options to work on this. So if somebody would like to, a couple of people, we could work on it together. I see Carrie smiling. There you go, Carrie. All right.
And
I have no idea what I'm doing, but if you tell me what to do, I will try to do it.
Well, you've heard a lot about the discussion. It's not
indeed I have.
not rocket science. You've heard probably more than you ever wanted to know.
And I would ask, if we're doing an LPC issue, that Pam and David, you guys get connected. You're the people on this, because you're the ones who complain the loudest about these issues, and we're trying to find the solutions. And I want David to stop ever having to complain about the oldest house in Chelsea ever again. We're going to find the solutions.
Okay. Does anybody want to lay odds that the new owner of 404 West 20th Street gets his, because he's already got approval of the project, goes in there, and as soon as he starts monkeying around with tearing the rest of the building down,
it all comes down.
It all comes down. The entire facade of that house is doomed.
It has been sitting vacant and deteriorating for so many years, it'll be condemned. Mike Noble had his hand up. Let's give Mike the chance to speak, and then it's 9 o'clock, so let's try to wrap this up.
Yeah, we got to end.
Good night, everybody.
All right, well, look,
Mike Noble wanted to speak.
How about it? How about it now? One final thought, historical note, where we have the interplay of LPC and DOB acting perhaps not in, together. All right. You recall the Hopper Gibbons house, Betty?
Yes,
Oh,
29th
Okay.
Street, right?
So there you had an owner of a house, a landmark house, a landmark block, who built an addition on top.
Yep.
That he was required to take this down. Okay.
Took years and years
Took
of
years.
protests and press conferences for that to
Right.
come down, right, Pam?
And we
Oh,
went,
yeah.
in fact, I know this because I went and I presented our letter to LPC behind Dick Gottfried, who in fact used our letter for his own comments. In any event, there you had a case where the LPC could not force DOB to act and have this man actually remove the stuff off the roof. All right. I don't remember how long it took, what happened, but all I can say is they were the weaker of the two entities. All right. And we've got to have somebody, maybe it is the deputy mayor, come in and be the referee and say, look here, when it comes to these matters, and there's two of you, I'm going to put the LPC in charge, right? I mean, that's a glaring example of where they were weakened by DOB simply not acting, right? So
That's a good point. We'll put that on our idea list.
And I've got the letter. If anybody wants to see the letter, I've got it in hand. Okay.
Right. Is that a good positive step that we can now, it's 9 o'clock. We can say good night.
Say good
Can I
night.
have a motion to have everybody have a happy holidays, stay safe, stay unviraled.
I second.
Right.
There's Jesse.
Happy
Jesse,
New
I
Year,
hope your family
everyone.
does
Good
well.
holiday.
Keep saying no to Lev. Have a good holiday, everybody.
No to
Water's on, Hector. The water's on, Hector.
Wonderful.
Good.
Good.
Happy New Year, everybody.
And we
Bye.
should